We build statues of revolutionaries. We make blockbuster movies about rebels who defied authority. We teach our children about the heroes who broke the rules and changed the world. But when someone actually disrupts the status quo in our own neighborhood, our own workplace, our own time, we call security. We draft policies. We demand order. Why do we celebrate rebellion everywhere except where we actually live? There's a strange contradiction at the heart of how we think about defiance. George Washington was a rebel. So was Rosa Parks, Nelson Mandela, Galileo, Joan of Arc. We name schools after them, quote them in speeches, hold them up as exemplars of courage. But if any of them showed up today, doing what they did then, would we support them? Or would we be the ones calling them troublemakers, extremists, threats to stability? Today, we're dissecting this paradox. We'll explore why underdogs look heroic from a distance, how time transforms rebels into saints, why stability feels more precious when it's your stability being threatened, how we simultaneously crave progress and fear chaos, and where exactly the line falls between freedom fighter and dangerous agitator. By the end, you might question which side of history you're actually on. The irresistible romance of the underdog. There's something about the underdog story that bypasses our rational brain and speaks directly to our emotions. David versus Goliath, Luke Skywalker versus the Empire, a small band of colonists versus the British monarchy. These narratives are embedded so deeply in our culture that we barely notice how completely they shape our sense of heroism. But here's what makes these stories work. Distance. When you're watching from the safety of a movie theater or reading from the comfort of your couch, rebellion is thrilling. There's no actual risk to you. The underdog's struggle becomes entertainment, inspiration, a vicarious thrill. You get to feel the emotional satisfaction of seeing authority challenged without experiencing any of the consequences. This is why we can simultaneously root for the rebellious teenager in a coming-of-age film, while being deeply uncomfortable with actual teenage rebellion in our own families. It's why we admire historical rebels while being suspicious of contemporary activists. In stories, we know how it ends. The underdog wins or loses nobly, and either way, the narrative is contained, complete, safe. We can admire the courage without experiencing the uncertainty. The underdog story also allows us to imagine ourselves as the hero without having to act like one. We identify with the rebel, feel their struggle, celebrate their victory, and then go back to our lives without actually rebelling against anything. It's moral heroism without moral risk, courage without consequence. The luxury of looking backward. History has a remarkable talent for cleaning up messy rebels and turning them into saints. But if you could actually travel back to the moment these people were doing their rebelling, you'd find something very different from the polished statues we've built. Martin Luther King Jr. was deeply unpopular in his own time. A 1966 Gallup poll showed that 63% of Americans had a negative view of him. Suffragettes were called hysterical, dangerous, unnatural. The abolitionists were considered radical extremists. Every major social movement that we now celebrate was, in its own moment, controversial, divisive, and frightening to the majority of people living through it. What changed? Not the actions. Those remain the same. What changed is the outcome. Once we know how the story ends, once we can see that society didn't collapse, that the rebels were right about the injustice they opposed, we retroactively grant them hero status. We engage in what psychologists call hindsight bias, the tendency to see past events as more predictable than they actually were. This lets us off the hook in a profound way. We can say, I would have supported the civil rights movement, or I would have hidden Anne Frank, without ever having to test that claim. Because those choices are gone. They're safe. The only rebels we have to actually deal with are the ones in our present. And with them, we don't yet know if they'll be proven right. So we wait. We hedge. We stay cautious. And in doing so, we become exactly the kind of people who would have opposed the historical rebels we now claim to admire. When rebellion threatens your dinner table. Let's get uncomfortably honest. Rebellion sounds great until it threatens something you care about. And if you have anything in your life that works reasonably well, a stable job, a safe neighborhood, reliable institutions, predictable rules, then you have something to lose from disruption. This is the fundamental tension. Social order isn't just an abstract concept, it's the invisible infrastructure that makes your daily life possible. You can go to work because you trust that traffic laws will mostly be followed. You can buy groceries because you trust that the economic system will mostly function. You can sleep at night because you trust that most people will mostly obey most laws most of the time. When someone rebels, when they break rules, challenge authority, disrupt norms, they're not just making a philosophical point. They're pulling at threads in the fabric that keeps your life stable. And your brain, quite reasonably, perceives this as a threat. Not necessarily because you're conservative or resistant to change, but because you're human, and humans are wired to protect what they have. This is why rebellion is always more popular among those with less to lose. If the system isn't working for you, disrupting it sounds like opportunity. If the system is working for you, even imperfectly, disrupting it sounds like danger. The question isn't whether rebellion is good or bad, it's whose ox is being gored, and whether you're riding that ox. The impossible calculus. Progress versus chaos. Here's where it gets truly complex. Because we actually do want progress, we want justice, equality, innovation, growth. We want wrongs to be righted and outdated systems to be updated. We just want it to happen smoothly, predictably, without anyone getting hurt, or scared, or inconvenienced. But that's not how change works. Real transformation is messy. It involves conflict, disruption, people being uncomfortable. The civil rights movement didn't succeed through polite requests. It succeeded through sit-ins that broke laws, marches that blocked traffic, boycotts that hurt businesses. The American Revolution wasn't a peaceful negotiation. It was a war. Women's suffrage wasn't granted freely. It was fought for through protests that were considered scandalous at the time. We're caught between two competing desires: the yearning for a better world and the need for stability. We want rebels to fix what's broken, but only if they do it in a way that doesn't break anything else. We want revolution, but comfortable revolution. Transformation without disruption. Progress without cost. This is impossible, and on some level we know it. So we develop a coping mechanism. We support rebellion in principle while opposing it in practice. We admire historical rebels while dismissing contemporary ones. We say we want change while defending the status quo against those who would actually change it. The impossible line between hero and villain. The truth is, there is no clear line between freedom fighter and troublemaker. It's the same person, seen from different perspectives and different moments in time. Nelson Mandela was labeled a terrorist by multiple governments, including the United States, which didn't remove him from its terrorism watch list until 2008, 14 years after he won the Nobel Peace Prize. The Boston Tea Party was property destruction. The Underground Railroad broke federal law. Every rebel who succeeded eventually becomes a hero. And every rebel who failed remains a troublemaker in history's judgment. What determines which category someone falls into isn't the morality of their actions or the purity of their motives. It's whether they won, and whether enough time has passed for us to feel comfortable with the disruption they caused. We don't call someone a freedom fighter because they fought for freedom. We call them a freedom fighter because they fought for freedom and succeeded. And enough years have gone by that we can't remember how terrifying their rebellion felt to people living through it. This should make us deeply uncomfortable. It means our judgment of rebels says less about them and more about us, about our position, our proximity to power, our tolerance for uncertainty. The activist blocking traffic today and the civil rights hero we celebrate from the 1960s might be doing essentially the same thing. The only difference is we know how one story ended. So why do we admire rebellion in stories but fear it in our society? Because stories are safe and reality is not. Because history comes with spoilers and the present doesn't. Because we all have something to protect, even if that something is just the predictability of tomorrow being roughly like today. But here's what this contradiction reveals about us. Our admiration for historical rebels is often performative. It's a way of feeling morally courageous without taking moral risks. We can celebrate Rosa Parks while opposing the activist blocking your commute for the same reasons Parks herself was arrested. We can praise revolutionaries while defending the institutions those revolutionaries would have torn down. We can, in essence, be on both sides, the side of change when it's safe, the side of order when it's not. This doesn't make us hypocrites, necessarily. It makes us human. We are genuinely pulled in both directions, toward justice and toward stability, toward progress and toward peace. The tension is real and it's not easily resolved. But it's worth asking yourself, if you lived in a different era, when the rebels you now admire were doing their rebelling, which side would you actually have been on? Not which side you'd like to think you'd have been on, but which side you probably would have chosen, given your position, your fears, your stake in the existing order. The answer might tell you something important about where you stand right now, with the rebels of your own time. Here's the question I'll leave you with. Think of someone in our current moment who's being called a troublemaker, an extremist, someone disrupting order. In 50 years, will we be building statues of them? And more importantly, does your answer change how you think about them right now? Let me know in the comments. And if this made you think differently about rebellion and order, subscribe for more explorations of the contradictions we live with.